And today we're going to be talking about hiring attorneys and really when doing so, how to understand whether or not the person is going to be able to do the job long term. And this is one of the three most important hiring criteria that law firms need to be following when hiring attorneys, because a lot of times people will hire attorneys that in all honesty, probably won't stick around. And if you hire someone who's not going to stick around, you're basically going to cause a lot of problems for your firm. And not only will the person be unproductive while they're there, but they're always going to be looking for a job. They'll undermine the morale of your people. They won't follow instructions. And there's just all sorts of other issues. And so most law firms are pretty good at understanding this, but a lot of times people will get distracted and by the quality of by an attorney's background and other things and believe that they may stay where they go. And this is actually one of my favorite topics in terms of management and keeping attorneys to stick around. And there's just a lot of can look at in the background. And the main problem I see is that most law firms hire people that really, when they're hiring them, are not going to stick around forever and are going to be at the firm, if most, for just a few years. And it's especially so at the associate level. And the reason I believe that it's so problematical to hire attorneys that are not going to stick around is because they're never going to commit. And if they're not going to commit, then they're always going to be on the lookout for better opportunities. They're never going to be putting in the full effort they should be putting in. And then also, they may also be only after a paycheck. And a lot of these attorneys are very good at fast talking their way into jobs. And I've seen consistently, there's lots of people that can go into almost any job and get jobs, but it's really a huge problem. These are the reasons that law firms should avoid hiring attorneys that really are non-committed and aren't going to stick around. The first thing is that they're going to leave when things become difficult in their job. And they may be there for a paycheck, but they want the work pretty much to conform to their conditions. And what that means is if they don't want to work long hours, then if the hours become long, they'll leave. If they don't want to be challenged, when things become challenging, they may leave. If they're criticized, then you have to worry about them leaving. And if there's problems with your brand, meaning your firm's in the press for some bad things or something bad happens in your office, and then they may leave. And they may not want to be pushed too hard. And you can tell these types of attorneys too, by the way, a lot of times when you interview them, because they'll ask about the hours. They'll ask about assignments. They'll act like they won't be open to criticism. And there's just a lot of things you can tell every time you interview them. But when you hire attorneys like this, it almost always backfires. I once hired a very talented attorney to work for a small firm I was running in Malibu. And really wasn't much of a law firm. It was more like an in-house counsel type of job. But I had a law firm name. So when we could, basically use a law firm name. And the attorney was ostensibly seeking a new position because she didn't enjoy driving around Los Angeles for work every day, which is a good reason for, if you live in Malibu, for working locally, because it can be like an hour and a half commute. And despite that, she was on the verge of she said that she was on the verge of becoming partner at her current firm. She liked the work she was doing, but she really wanted to work locally. And she really wasn't that concerned with the compensation. I ended up paying her about 50% less or 25% less than she was making in a large law firm. And she actually did very good work. And she was a great hire in almost all respects. But after just literally the day after a very stressful deposition that didn't go as well as she had planned, and where the opposing counsel was not very nice to her, she gave notice and she quit. And she basically said that she was stressed, she wanted to start a family, and no longer interested in practicing law. And this is very common. I certainly am not angry with her, and I wasn't at the time, but I made a mistake hiring someone that was running away from hard work and responsibility. And I should have seen that, because the moment the position became too challenging, she left. And if you looked at her background, she wasn't committed enough at her former job to make partner. She was more concerned about reducing her commute than her salary or the prestige level of working in a large law firm as opposed to working in my small firm. And there's nothing wrong with this. And I should have just listened to that initially and realized that if the work got stressful, she would probably leave. And that's exactly what happened. And so law firms make this mistake all the time. They'll hire people that when they give their reasons for looking, you can tell that they're probably not going to stick around. And attorneys that are suited to work in the long term almost often endure the ups and downs wherever they go. And they're not going to come up with excuses to leave whenever the work is not going the way they want it to. They're going to stick around. And that's a certain personality type, by the way, too. And I'm going to talk a lot about that today because honestly, there are people that if you look at their resume, their last firm, they might have been at 6 or 7 years. The previous firm before that, they were at several years, and their reasons for moving are usually pretty good. It's not that things aren't going well or something happened. It's something beyond their control, and it doesn't reflect on their work or their lack of commitment. One of the mistakes that I've made, and it's a kind of a cardinal rule. I read there was this list of things that a billionaire, a famous billionaire in Los Angeles, had written down as his 25 career roles or 20 rules or something. And right at the top was never rehire anyone. And that was one of his career rules. And I read that early in my career and I never followed it. And I've made the mistake before of hiring people back that have quit. And most of the time when someone quits your firm or where they're working, they're quitting because there's a part of your job that they don't like. It could be the workload is too much or they don't like certain people they're working with and so forth, and there's issues. And if somebody quits, and when I say quit, I actually leave and go do something else. People certainly quit for a day or two sometimes and come back. But if somebody actually quits, then that's not a good sign. And they typically will leave again. As an example, I had a human resources leave once because we had moved offices from, I don't know, downtown Los Angeles to Pasadena. And it was a lot of work because we were moving a lot of people and there was moving and a lot of coordination. And he quit the day after the move, just like this one girl quit the day after her deposition. And he just said the job was too stressful. And he cited various reasons that the move had been stressful and it was too much, for him. And I urged him to stay, that there wouldn't be other moves and so forth. And he came back. And over the next few months, the company continued to grow. His job became stressful again and he left. And this time I let him. And I wanted a less stressful position. And it was funny, I was in court about a year ago and I saw him and he was working in human resources in a court office, helping judges hire clerks or something, a much less stressful position. And that was the kind of job he wanted. And he didn't want to commit to working in a private office with serious demand. If you hire people that are looking for less challenge than you have, then they're going to leave. And most people have boiling points that upset them and will cause them to leave if they're not committed. And many times they're looking for reasons to leave and they're looking for reasons everywhere they go to find reasons to leave. And what I think is important for law firms to do is when someone's looking for a new position, ask them why they're looking. And if the reasons for looking involve issues that are likely to occur in all firms, then they're not going to be the best hires because they're going to leave your firm too. And it's something you just need to be aware of. And I talk to attorneys all day long, and I've been doing it for the better part of a couple decades. And honestly, lawyers leave firms for the strangest reasons. And they'll leave because they heard some bad news about their firm. And anytime there's bad news about a firm in the press, even if the firm is 100 plus years old, certain people from that firm will start looking. And these are an example of people that aren't committed. Others will just leave when they don't get a review. Instead of improving and getting better, they'll say, I want to go someplace where I'm valued. And law firms, by the way, shouldn't feel threatened that people are going to leave if they start bringing in a lot of work or if there's bad news or if they give a bad review. You can't treat everyone with kid gloves. You're running a business and you obviously have certain standards and you're trying to make a profit and everything, and you need to be careful. And the other thing that I think is that one of the reasons that you don't want to hire non-committed attorneys is when a non-committed attorney leaves, they always cost your firm a lot of money. It'll take a lot of time for the firm to get up to speed, or for the new person to get up to speed on the matters. And clients certainly don't like it when there's lots of attorneys getting up to speed and learning and rotating in and out of the stuff that they're working on. And it's not good for the continuity of relationships. There can always be a variation in the quality of the service if they become accustomed to the work that one attorney is doing and the way that person responds to them, and then they have to, work with another person, and it also costs them a lot of money many times to get other people up to speed. And so that's not good. And then, of course, when an attorney leaves, that means that attorney and the work they're doing is no longer necessarily getting done, and you're going to lose money. You're going to have work that's not getting done that could otherwise be done. And that's going to cost your firm quite a bit of money. You're absolutely much better off having that money and having someone there getting the work done. And then another thing that I think is fairly serious is that if someone's non-committed, they're really always pretty much undermining the morale of other attorneys, both before and after they leave. They may talk about how your firm's not prestigious, how you're not paying enough, how there's things wrong with the attorneys that have given bad reviews, that the clients aren't good. And so they'll undermine the whole fabric of your firm. And people that are committed won't do that. And obviously, it's not easy to find committed people and to create a culture of commitment. But when people start leaving a lot, it's not good. And when I was practicing law, I remember that, all the time there would be people that would stop by my office and for a half hour to an hour a day would talk about what was wrong with the firm and how they wanted to do something different, work somewhere else, and so forth. And partners would do that with each other. And see that as a result, it created doubts in my mind that I had, made the right career decisions being there. And it made me unhappy, even though I otherwise might have been happy at the firm. If the firm's bringing in people that are non-committed, this is something that they're almost always going to do, because people that are non-committed are going to look for people that support their point of view and see the world in a similar way. And then the other thing is it takes up a lot of time to replace non-committed attorneys. So if you think about it, interviewing takes a lot of time. Some law firms now, especially with Zoom and so forth, are interviewing a lot of people for positions. Instead of interviewing a few, they may interview twice as many. And a lot of firms are into your offices. It takes a lot of time and you have to fly out and schedule things. And it's just a lot of work. And that's time that attorneys could be billing. It's time that you could be doing work for clients. And it's time where where you're losing money. And sometimes it takes several weeks. I mean, you have reference checks and all sorts of things to bring in a new attorney. It's a lot of work and it costs a lot of money. And that's why you're much better off many times not hiring attorneys to begin with. And then the other thing I like about non-committed attorneys is that most of the time they're not trying to become better. They don't care so much about becoming better at their job. They're not trying to increase their performance. They're not trying to get ahead. They're not trying to get clients. They're not trying to learn more about their field or get exposed to new things. Instead, they're often content to coast as long as they can hold on to their job. And this can cost you a lot of good service to your clients, and it can contribute to a culture of averageness and where things don't change. And then if your clients leave, that's going to hurt you as well. And the best lawyers that are committed are always wanting to improve, and being an attorney in a law firm, hopefully, is their main option and what they want to do. And they're eager to get better. And non-committed attorneys, most of the time, don't care because they would rather be performing other work. And then the non-committed attorney often is not someone that's going to grow your firm. So they're not going to try to generate business and find clients and look for ways to do that well. They may not be interested in this and the work it takes to get clients. This is going to hold back your growth of your firm and not help. They're not bringing in business and have no intention of doing so. It's going to hurt you, and they're going to be a cost center rather than a profit center many times, and doing work that could be done by partners, perhaps at less cost and so forth. Other thing is by not performing at their highest level, that's going to make your firm less profitable. If they're not concerned about their performance, the service they're doing decreases. They'll bill fewer hours and be less profitable. The service your clients get won't be as good, and it's going to cost you money. And I've seen a lot of non-committed attorneys that have done work for me personally at firms right before they got ready to go. And suddenly the work would be turned in with mistakes and typos and all sorts of issues. And the reason is because the attorney was getting ready to leave and just wasn't thinking through things. And that made me upset. And in one case, I did fire a law firm because the service was so poor. So and that can happen if the person's not committed. And then the other thing too is if someone's not committed, that means that they're thinking about doing other things. And non-committed attorneys spend a lot of time on job websites, and they spend a lot of time networking and talking to people about potential jobs and thinking about other things they could do and fantasizing, and because they're looking for the next thing. And that means also that they may be billing for time when they're doing that work, when they're at the office, and maybe not giving their full effort and doing the best service. And so for your clients, and that's going to cost you. And then the other thing, non-committed attorneys, people that are non-committed to your firm. So sometimes lawyers are just non-committed to the firm and not even the practice of law, just your firm. And they can come there and they will take clients. They may take other attorneys with them to the firm. And lots of times you'll hire law firms will hire partners that are not committed and will do the same thing. And so that that costs you a great deal of money. Also, many non-committed attorneys will be looking for ways to make money or quick bucket your expense. And one of the ways they do it is they can make up perceived transactions or transgressions and threaten to take legal. And honestly, this is one that I almost didn't want to include in this list, but I am including it because I've just seen it way too many times. And when I say many times, I mean I see it at least I see it several times a year. A lot of times they'll manufacture disputes. I've seen ones where they manufacture disputes about the air quality of the firm. So, the ones where they're just different types of things, and it's not good. I once knew a female attorney, for example. This is a long time ago, but who became addicted to crystal meth while working at a large law firm, and she had a very good pedigree. And so she fabricated a story, and I know she fabricated a story because I knew her friend making a pass at her so she could get a large settlement, and that never happened. And I've seen this sort of thing many times. And and this is just another example, but this is a funny one, but I once had a warehouse that didn't have any cameras in it, and people were working there 24 hours a day. We were doing like sending out letters and other things. And before installing these cameras, I probably had one person every few months sue me for injuries. And they would always be like, I was walking and I fell down because someone left a box of paper or something. And then I installed cameras all over the warehouse, and then they stopped completely all the injuries. For years, I didn't have any, whereas I spent several years fighting several of them because of no cameras. And then I once was representing a man looking for a job, and he'd been fired. And he made up a story about his company that he'd been working for doing something illegal, and then even made up a story about his male heterosexual boss for making a pass at him or something, which was absolutely ridiculous. And when I found out about this, I certainly didn't have anything to do with him, and never helped him with his job search. But this is the kind of stuff that goes on. And so there's just a lot of people out there that are looking for trouble. And if someone's not committed, they think, why not burn some bridges? It's not going to necessarily hurt me. Because this isn't something I'm interested in really doing for the long term. So those are some of the problems of non-committed attorneys, and I hope that it's enough to show you that it's definitely not a good thing when you hire non-committed attorneys. But I did want to go over with you some signs that are going to indicate the attorney is not likely to stick around for the long term. And this is something that, by the way, that very good firms I've noticed are pretty good at figuring out, and it's almost like it's just in their institutional DNA. But a lot of firms aren't good at it, and this is really. The stuff I'm talking about, by the way, I think it's very smart for you to be watching this, and because running a legal business is really about hiring the right people that can make you the most money, and that's what a law firm is. And so you need to know how to do this. And so this type of talk I'm doing right now is something, if people understand it and don't make these mistakes, can really make a major difference in how effectively your law firm runs. And so I certainly appreciate you listening, and I hope this helps. But one of the things that indicate that an attorney is likely to stick around is when the attorney has significant commitments. And those are things like a spouse, a home, or children. And if somebody has a spouse, home, and children, they need that group of people need stability. The children need stability. The wife needs stability, or the husband needs stability if the woman's working. And these people are unlikely to leave for trivial reasons because they're rooted to wherever they are. And this is especially so with law firms, because law firms, many times, if the person buys an expensive house, then the odds are not that they're not going to be able to make as much money working outside of a law firm in-house, and that they're likely to stay. And law firms encourage attorneys, and you should encourage your attorneys to settle down, buy homes and nice cars and things, because the more of that they do, the more likely they are to stick around and try to bring in business and grow your firm. The other thing is if an attorney's resume indicates that all they want to do is the sort of work that they're doing, that's also a good sign. If an attorney works in one practice area and that's all they've done, then the odds are that they're going to stick around. Attorneys that are bouncing around between practice areas are not always a good sign, because the person's figuring out what to do. And if they're trying to switch practice areas at your firm, they may try to switch practice areas at another firm, leave your firm and or go back to a practice area and so forth. When you see stability in their resume, like a lot of times, for example, if the person's a healthcare attorney, they may have done healthcare work and before law school, then they may have done it in college, and then they may be doing it now, then that's a good sign that the person's likely to stick around. When you see that they've maybe written articles and given talks and they're part of different groups, this suggests that's all the person wants to do. And those are very good hires. That's one reason I tell our recruiters here that you should difficult, for example, to place people that are trying to switch practice areas, and that usually never works. Other things that indicate the person is likely to stick around, not always, of course, but if the person's doing lots of things doing lots of writing and speaking, teaching and promoting themselves and really active in the community, that means that they want to be an attorney and they're taking this role seriously. They're excited about it and that they're out there doing it. And that's a sign that the person is likely to stick around, or at least in the profession. And then the other thing is the practice setting. I think it's very risky for law firms to hire people that are in-house. I think it's very risky for them to hire people from academia. I think it's very risky to hire people from non-law firm practice settings, because it's very clear probably that person is going to go back to doing something like that. If you hire an attorney from public interest, the odds are they're going to go back to doing public interest work, and they're doing that for a reason. If you hire someone in-house, I mean, it's just a different skill. I think that you need to be very careful if you hire people from different practice settings. It's just people that come over to law firms from different practice settings rarely stick around, and it just doesn't happen. And people will come into law firms and talk about how they want to work in a law firm many times from in-house and from different practice settings, but most of the time it doesn't work out, and they don't stick around and they go back to the practice setting they're in. Because if someone moves from a law firm to in-house, they generally do it for a reason, and they're going to do it again. Just like the example that I gave you, never rehire anyone. If someone leaves the law firm environment, the odds are pretty good that they're not going to come back and be happy. The other thing is that's a good sign is that if you are in a smaller market and you operate in kind of a niche practice area without a lot of opportunities for this type of attorney, if you're in a small to mid-sized market and there's not a lot of firms that do what you do, the odds are that the person's going to stick around. I recently worked with a private equity attorney relocating from, I don't know, New York, I think, and to Detroit, because his wife is from there. And he wanted to be in Detroit and move back there. And there's only one firm in the whole city that has a really good reputation in private equity. And so that was a good firm for him to work at. It's like that in markets like Salt Lake City. If someone wants to be a patent law, there's just a few really good firms there, or in other markets with different practice areas. If you have you're in a small market, or you have a very niche practice area in a large market that not a lot of people do, then you really could be a good fit for many firms. The other thing is that if an attorney is moving up to be at your firm, so a lot of times, and this is actually a very good hire as well, like an attorney will be trying to move to a better firm, and maybe they're at a mid-sized firm, and then your firm is is a large firm in that market, and you know that the attorney's probably not lifted them in years ever. If it's a very significant move up for that attorney, they may stay. And if the attorney's had a couple of moves, like from a very small firm to a bigger, a better firm, and then to your firm, which is maybe a major national firm, they're likely to stay. And a lot of times attorneys are just trying to better themselves and get to the best firm they possibly can. And sometimes it takes time. And so if you're a very prestigious firm and there's other things on their resume, like their commitment to their practice area and extracurricular outside activities where it shows they're trying to brand themselves in their business and their practice area and their market, then they're probably likely to stay. And that's a good sign. And then the big thing that I always look for is, and I personally think this is the most important of them all, is if the attorney has a lot of employment stability in their previous positions. Many times an attorney will have worked for previous employers for a long time. And if they have, then they're likely to stick around with you for a long time. The best indicator of future employment stability is really what the person's done in the past. And the best hires are almost always attorneys who've worked for the same employer for a long period of time. I've seen, and I have multiple examples of this, but I tell this story all the time, but the first two recruiters I hired, one of them had been at her previous firm, 6 or 7 years, and the other one had been at her previous firm for 13 years. The one who'd been at her previous firm for 6 or 7 years, which wasn't a recruiting firm, it was a law firm, stayed with me for 8 years. And the one who'd been at her previous firm for 13 years stayed with me for 17 years or 18 years. I don't remember what the exact number was, but it was something along those lines. And so and during that time, lots of people came to work in the company that had been in their law firms 1 or 2 years, and they also stayed with me 1 or 2 years. So there's just certain people that make things work. It's like that with romantic relationships, and it's like that with friendships, and it's like that with employers as employees as well. Certain people are able to commit to an employer and will stick around and do their best and commit. Other people are going to be bouncing around, and you can usually tell that based on their resume and what they've done in the past. And then the other thing I always think is a really good sign is when people speak very enthusiastically about their work, the people they're working with, the matters they've worked on. So if someone's very enthusiastic, that means that, they typically have a lot of passion for what they're doing. talking about what they do gets them excited. They may get visibly excited when they're talking about things. And if somebody really likes their work, then they're probably committed. If you get a lot of joy out of something, then you're probably going to stick around. And people certainly can fake that. But I think that if people are talking about various people they work with that they admire and so forth, and if they were trying to work with the best attorneys in their practice areas or their firms, then those are often very good risk for you to hire. And another thing I've noticed too about the best attorneys is they're very proud of the work that they do. So they tend to put together very detailed transaction sheets about all the work that they've done. They tend to put together, they have very clear, good records of all the litigation they've done. The litigators will often keep these kind of giant form files of all the different things that they think are important. And this is just something that the most, committed attorneys do. And so when people have kind of resumes that talk about all their transactions, and that's a sign that they're writing everything down. They're trying to build a really good record, and they're excited about the work that they do. So those are the signs that people will stick around. And here are the signs the attorney is probably not going to stick around. And this is going to go a little bit fast compared to the other stuff. But the big one is that they've had several jobs, none of them lasted too long. And this just suggests that the person's never found their footing, may not have done well in the past positions, may just leave for more money, or who knows, doesn't have long-term goals to be with a single employer, and it's just a journeyman. And these people will always leave. And there's really no firm or probably organization that can ever make these types of attorneys happy. It has nothing to do with you. And when you see resumes like this, unless there's extraordinary reasons for all this movement, you should just move on. You shouldn't try to hire people that aren't going to stick around, because even if you believe that you offer the perfect environment for them, the odds are that you don't. Some people make it work and other people don't. The other thing is a practice area. If someone doesn't look committed to their practice area, that's a bad sign. People that are trying to do different things all the time with their practice areas typically just don't like practicing law. And they believe that if they switch from private equity to only doing M&A or doing commercial litigation instead of healthcare litigation, or I don't know, but they're going to be happy practicing law. And most often that's not it at all. It's just that they're just unhappy working in a law firm or practicing law, and they believe that some sort of practice area change is going to make them happier. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not good reasons. Sometimes people want to move from insurance defense to, commercial litigation because they feel like they want to represent bigger clients with deeper budgets and do more work, or they want to work on more sophisticated matters and they want to move from doing general corporate to securities work or something. And so there's certainly reasons for all this, but for the most part, when people are trying to do many different things, that's a sign that they're probably not going to stick around. Now, there are a bunch of caveats to this. Sometimes attorneys in smaller firms will have to do a bunch of different practice areas and so forth. But what I'm talking about, for the most part, are when people are trying to switch practice areas. So that would be doing all environmental from just doing litigation, or doing environmental or trying to switch to tax from corporate or something. People that are trying to switch practice areas like that typically are not going to last. And I see things all the time and that indicate someone's not committed to their practice area. In Los Angeles, there's attorneys that you can look at their resume and they have all these things that show that they might have been in entertainment law journals in law school. They've been in entertainment law clubs in law school. Then when they were in law school, they did entertainment related internships. And now they're doing litigation with a large law firm. And when I look at that, I know that person's not going to stick around, because eventually they're going to get an entertainment law position. They always do. So another firm could hire them as a commercial litigator. That person is always going to be trying to get an in-house job or do something in entertainment law, and they're going to keep trying until they get one. And for whatever reason, there's something inside of them that's driving them to do entertainment law. Bad hires. So you can tell a lot of times by people's resume and what interest it shows, what they're going to end up doing in the long run. And the person's not committed to your practice setting is another one. I brought this up earlier, but if someone's worked in a law firm, then worked as a law professor, then worked in-house, or done all these different things, they're not going to stick around long in your practice setting either. These are people that are trying to find their footing and trying to find the best place for them. And that's fine. And they probably will eventually, but the odds are more in the favor that they're not going to stick around at your firm and will do something else. And then the other thing is that I don't like is when an attorney doesn't have a geographic commitment to where you are. So a lot of times attorneys are going to be seeking positions all over the country. They may be applying to jobs in the rural South and New York and the Pacific Northwest. And the likelihood of that person staying wherever they're hired is not good. A lot of times law firms will hire those people, and then they'll always go back home. They'll say, I want to move back home, or I miss New York, or I miss Los Angeles, or I miss whatever, wherever they were before. So if someone's relocating, then the odds are pretty good, if they don't have any connections there, that they're not going to stay, especially with smaller markets. I've seen people hired in South Carolina that are from Washington, D.C., and they just don't like it. There's not as many dating opportunities if they're single, the sports teams, restaurants, and the types of clients. And so law firms have to be very careful about hiring people that don't have a geographic commitment to their market and are unlikely to stay, even if it looks like the person's going to could do good work. Most of the time, not all the time, but a good portion of the time, those people don't stay. And smaller markets also tend to limit attorneys. So if you hire people, for example, from very diverse backgrounds in smaller markets, they may be uncomfortable. There's not a lot of diversity in different places. And I had an instance where a guy from China was hired by a law firm to do agricultural litigation it was like North Dakota or something. It was very funny. And he certainly was not happy there and doing everything he could to get out of there. And so a lot of times he wanted to be in a more diverse environment where there were other people that spoke Chinese. So it was more comfortable for him. So it just depends. A lot of times people want to be in more diverse markets. And so you have to be careful about that. And it's certainly not saying to discriminate against people from diverse markets, but that want to be in diverse markets. But if you don't have a lot of diversity in your market, that's going to be many times people are not going to want to stick around, and you just need to be careful about doing a good job integrating them. And then the other thing is, if a lawyer has a long-standing connection to a smaller market, so an example would be if a lawyer, I was talking to a lawyer yesterday from, I believe, Grand Rapids, Michigan, or something like that, and her whole family was from there, and she never wanted to leave. But she certainly could get a job in a large city if she wanted to. But if she got a job in a large city, the odds are pretty good that she would come back. And then it's very common for attorneys from places like Salt Lake City to go and work in a larger market for a few years. But then their whole support network, when they have children and so forth, is going to be in Salt Lake, and their parents are in Salt Lake, so they want to come back. And so you need to understand where the attorneys you are from, where the attorneys you're hiring are from, and if they have family members there and so forth. And if they're from your area, then the odds are that they're going to stick around. But if they're not, then you have to really wonder why, if they're going to stick around. And in most cases, those attorneys will very quickly start looking for new jobs. I remember talking to a woman not too long ago that was hired in a small town in South Carolina, and all the attorneys in her firm had gone to the same high school. They all knew each other, and she was really felt excluded socially in the whole town, even from like local swim clubs and things, because she was considered an outsider. And so she almost immediately began looking for new jobs, and even though she was in a specialty that they needed. And then a lot of times this is something that may seem a little off kilter, but I do think it's worth mentioning, is if an attorney is independently wealthy or has a spouse capable of supporting them, then many times, and it depends on the person, of course. I know lots of people that are extremely motivated, and I, for example, will continue doing what I'm doing forever, regardless if I won the lottery. Who cares? I love it. But a lot of attorneys, if they're supported, or they have a benefactor and so forth, they may lose some motivation. Having bills to pay and stuff does tend to make people sometimes a little bit more motivated. And it's not to say that people that don't have bills to pay are not motivated, because of course they are, myself included, but a lot of people aren't. And many people will stop working and will lose a lot of motivation if their family or other people are willing to pay their bills. And so that's just something to think about. It's not always the case. And a lot of people get a lot more satisfaction out of working than certainly having money in the bank, but it just depends on the person. Another thing is if an attorney has an entrepreneurial background. So a lot of times attorneys with entrepreneurial backgrounds are really just that it's just something that's natural, and you can't really break them of that. And it's very rare for attorneys who've started businesses in the past and run successful businesses to rejoin firms and stay there. Or if they've failed at a business venture, it's very rare for them to join a firm and stay there, because they'll often try to go back. And I believe it's almost like a genetic bent that a lot of these entrepreneurial attorneys have. And it's just they're so entrepreneurial and they have so much drive that it's very difficult to pin them down. And sometimes they can take out that entrepreneurial drive working for a law firm. And by bringing in clients, I think working in a law firm can be very entrepreneurial, by bringing in clients and doing all those sorts of things, and developing a book of business and a brand, and then using the law firm as a way to support them in their business. But not every attorney thinks that way. And it's something I certainly try to talk to them about a lot and convince them of, but not everybody does. And some people just have a genetic bent. They would rather run an unsuccessful law firm where they're not making very much money and the excitement of it than work in a large law firm where they're making a lot of money and have security. It just depends on the person. And then the other thing that's kind of a risk factor to some extent is when an attorney doesn't have any obligations, meaning they don't have a family, they don't have a home, they don't really appear to have any expenses and so forth. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the threat, of course, is if someone doesn't have anything that's holding them back, then they can leave in a moment's notice. And I've seen a lot of people just leave the practice law at a moment's notice. I've seen people work for 1 or 2 years in big law firms and then just quit one day with 1 week's notice and spend the next 5 or 6 years traveling the world. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if someone looks very concerned about having any form of obligations, even car payments and other things, then you need to be a little bit concerned if they're not establishing roots, that they may not stick around. And then another thing is if the attorneys run a solo practice. So a lot of times attorneys that have run solo practices will prefer working on their own. Sometimes they'll come back to law firms and succeed. And as a matter of fact, I would say a decent percentage of the time they come back and succeed. But for the most part, it doesn't work. And there may be like a 30 to 40% success ratio of that. But most often, those attorneys have solo practices because of things in their background or decisions they made in the past that made that better for them. And they'll typically go back to solo practices as well. And then another thing is if the attorney's had lots of different periods of unemployment on their resume. Many times an attorney may have lost jobs in the past, taken time off. And there's a rule in the legal profession that attorneys should never take time off and never stop working. It's okay to take a couple weeks off, but there shouldn't be gaps in your resume. And most really good attorneys don't have any gaps in their resume, and some do. But if there's a period of unemployment on the resume, that often is a sign that the person couldn't get work because of something in their background, got fired for doing something wrong, or just more often than not, and this is just decided they didn't want to work for a while. And if someone decides that they don't want to work for a while, that of course is a sign that maybe there's a lack of commitment there. Most attorneys I know that have taken significant time off in the practice of law and come back have left again. So that's worth repeating. Most attorneys I know that have taken significant time off that have left and then come back to law firms have left again. So it's the whole idea of like never rehire anyone. Most of the time, if you rehire someone that's taken a lot of time off, they're going to leave again. And if you hire them whether you're rehiring them at your firm and they formerly worked there or another firm, almost all of them will leave again because the same reasons they were unhappy before, they're not going to process them differently in the future. They're still going to leave again. Another thing I don't like is the attorney being very focused on money and short-term rewards. So many times you'll see this in young attorneys. They'll be very concerned about getting an extra $5,000 or $6,000 or extra $10,000. And if they're very concerned about that early in the interviews or after getting an offer, then they're going to be concerned with money when they're hired. And that's their primary goal. And they're most likely going to leave when they get more money elsewhere. The best attorneys, especially young attorneys, are there to get experience. And then other motivators are things like working with people that they like. And then as they get more senior, it's even working with people that they like. And if you're hiring people that are more focused on short-term rewards and more focused on money, then they're almost always going to leave if they can get a better job. And that means that money guides them and not things like the quality of the work, the people they're working with, and so forth. So you need to be very careful with that. And those are real major signs that the person's going to leave. Now, if your firm is paying significantly below market and that person's capable of making a lot more money elsewhere, then you might want to think about that. And what is a difference that's significant? I would say $15,000, $20,000 is probably a lot of money. People will give up money to get better experience. And the best people, by the way, in every profession will always give up a lot of money to work someplace where they can get really good experience because they care about their profession, their work, and the stuff that they're doing. So when you see people going to the U.S. Attorney's Office for half the salary they can make in a law firm or 1/3, and they want to get trial experience, they believe in the role of the U.S. Attorney's Office. When you see people work with a lot of times famous actors to work with a famous director may take the minimum salary to work on a movie instead of demanding millions of dollars. They get to work with a famous director. So people that are very concerned about their profession and how well they do typically are going to be more focused on the quality of the work and the quality of people that they're working with. But money certainly can motivate people, and it is something to be aware of. I mentioned this earlier, but people that are trying to switch practice areas, always a very risky type of hire, so you need to be very careful of that. if someone's trying to switch practice areas, the odds are they're not going to be committed to the new practice area as well. And that almost always is the case. Almost everyone that switches practice areas ultimately either goes back to the original practice area or isn't having the new practice area. Now, that's not always the case. Sometimes there's clear reasons for the person being in the wrong practice area. Sometimes I've seen instances where an attorney has done nothing but corporate work. They did as a summer associate, they did it their first and second year of practice, and then the corporate just fell off the face of the earth of their law firm. And so the law firm could keep them employed. They switched into litigation. And the person was there for 2 years, and they really wanted to go back to corporate. Now, that doesn't mean that the person has done anything wrong, and maybe it's okay to hire them for corporate. If someone's made a conscious decision to switch practice areas, that can be a very risky move. And then something else I don't like is when an attorney is very inflexible with their time. So I've seen attorneys that will say things like, I can only work in the office Monday through Thursday, and then I need to take Fridays off every week. And once somebody starts dictating the rules, like, that can be very risky. Most of those attorneys will not stick around because they've assumed control, and they will make new demands on you. So once you don't give them something else that they want and you don't give it to them, they will often leave. Now, I hate to say that because I don't think there's anything wrong with people asking for certain days off and so forth. But if people are completely inflexible with their time many times, then the second they don't get what they want, or they don't get something else that they demand in the future, they will often leave. And that's okay. They're in control of their career, but they are not necessarily the best type of hires if you want stability. And then the other thing I don't like is when an attorney is moving down in terms of the prestige level of the firm. So if people are moving to a less prestigious firm to do less prestigious work, it's not always a warning sign, and there's many reasons for it. But one of the reasons is that there may be hidden issues for that. They may be running away from something. They may believe that they're going to be able to work fewer hours, or most often the case is that they're taking this job because they don't believe there's anything better at the moment, or sometimes they have other problems. I've seen people consciously try to move down firms when they have serious substance abuse problems, or when they have issues with doing good work, or when they have attendance issues and things. So they think that their pedigree or whatever's going on with them in the background can be covered up and compensated for them maybe not working as good of a firm, or they may just want less responsibility. And I don't know, but many times it's just less hours, and that's actually okay. Going to a boutique for less hours and more client contact, there's all sorts of good reasons for it, but you definitely need to be careful as a law firm when you're trying to hire people that are trying to move down. And most really good most law firms, if the candidate is exceptional and applying to them, and they know that they're not as good of a law firm, will be very careful about interviewing that person. So I was telling a story on a webinar for candidates yesterday that I had this candidate that was exceptional. Like, you couldn't believe. He was from the best firm. He had the best law school. He was in the right practice area at the right time and had the best grades. And I submitted him to firms and nothing happened. And then I submitted him. Then I had other candidates I submitted the same firms that were 70% as good, and they all got interviews. And the firms that were less prestigious are the firms that it wouldn't interview this guy until I actually called them up and told them why he was interested in them, and he really was interested in them because they were smart, and they figured that maybe he wasn't interested in us, and why would we put ourselves out there? That's probably a risk. And he did have good reasons for wanting to work there, but you have to be careful. And then the other thing is, if an attorney is trying to get experience outside of their primary practice area, many times, as I told you earlier, they'll try a new practice area and that's not a good idea. Many times they'll do that because they make career mistakes and so forth. And so if they're trying to get experience outside of the primary practice area, that's not a good thing either. It's something to be careful of. And then the other thing that is often a bad sign, and not always, by the way, but if the attorney is coming to you because they're running from something, or something bad happened to them in the past, the law firms will avoid attorneys that have been fired, laid off, or lost their jobs in the recent past. And I think that they're a little bit extreme about that. I think that many times an attorney that's lost their job can be a good hire. But I have noticed that when an attorney has been fired in the past job, whether they've been laid off or fired, most often they become very paranoid in their next job. They are very aware of criticism, and many times they will fire that firm before being fired themselves. And they'll get back at the firm that fired them by getting mad at the firm that hired them after being fired. And so many of them are less committed after having been fired. So you need to be careful when you're hiring people that may have had those sorts of issues in the past. And so that is the webinar. I will take questions if anyone has them about the things we talked about today. And let me see here. Now, any questions you have, whether it's about this webinar or any other kind of hiring related questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. So just give me 1 second here. Oh, let's see here. Okay. Can you send me a recording of the webinar after the seminar? My connection is awful. Yes, I can send a question. Let's see. Okay, these are from attorneys, but this is okay. I'm happy to answer these questions. So I'm loving these webinars. I was wondering about making a lateral move, and I have a question. When getting referred by someone already at the new firm I want to work at, how do you go about lateraling? Do you give your friend your resume transcript or cover letter and writing sample to forward only your resume? How does this work? If you forward along cover letter, what would you include in it? Okay, you have to be a little bit careful when you're getting recommendations from when you're sending your resume to friends and so forth in a firm about lateraling. And the reason is when you're sending your resume and so forth to friends, because the big thing is that just because your friend is giving the resume to the hiring people, you never know how good or what kind of quality of recommendation the firm is going to give you and that your friend is going to give you. So your friend, many friends are competitive with each other. And so that your friend may actually not give you a good recommendation to the firm. And so that's just something you should think about. And they may not say something positive. And the other thing, you never know how your friend is regarding the firm. So if your friend is someone that gossips and may not be the hardest worker, you just don't know. They may actually hurt you. A recommendation coming through them as opposed to someone else may not be a good thing. So I would be careful. I noticed that a good proportion of the time, and when I say good proportion of the time, I would say 25% of the time, when someone gives a resume to a friend, the friend actually never gives it to the firm. So they tell them they're going to do it and they don't. I don't know why that is. Maybe friends are competitive with each other. Maybe their friend doesn't want the other person to work there, but that happens quite a bit. So you need to be careful about if you're giving your resume to a friend, what exactly, if the resume is actually making it to the right person. Let me just see. I'm going to try to pull this up for you so I can just show these questions. Okay, 1 second. Okay. The next question, I'm looking for any advice. Looking for advice. I still haven't looked down a summer associate internship offer. I have a few. Is there anything else to do now besides not applying to everything and anything? If you don't have a position in a law firm right now, that's okay. You still have a couple months. My advice is that I always recommend that people try to get a summer internship or a law firm job in the town that they're from. So applying to those firms in the market that you're from is always a good idea. The only other thing I'd recommend is just making sure you do the same thing with all the law firms in the town where you're going to school. That's also very useful and can be a good idea. And then also applying to everything and everything is a good idea. Then many times going into local law offices to give your resume out and walking in personally can also be a good thing. And it is a good idea to make sure you always have, it's always a good idea for you to do whatever you can to get a job. So you need to really, push yourself very hard to try to get a position. And that means many times just going places and knocking on doors and saying you work for free and that sort of thing. It is important to work in a law firm. One other thought that I just had is if you're going to be in the town where your law school is over the summer, sometimes you can take a class or something and maybe get a law firm to hire you on a part-time basis and put that down on your resume as well. A smaller law firm in the town if you want to stay there. But just because you don't have a job in a big firm doesn't mean you can never work in a big firm, and you should really go all out and apply to as many places as you can. Okay, well, there's a lot of questions here. Wow. Okay, I'm gonna just give me 1 second here. I'm trying to do something. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so I can open a kind of a Word document here and put all these questions up on a screen. Actually, I do have one open. There we go. Let me share screen. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, again, as many questions as everyone has, I'm happy to answer. So, okay, I answered that one. So done. Oh wait, I didn't answer that one. Give me 1 second. Okay, I work at a top 10 New York City firm in a transaction. My partner goes in the office every day, including weekends, and will email associates without any regard for weekends or any life outside of work. Is this normal or will it be a little better in another big firm? I don't mind the hours of big law, but it's getting harder to work in this guy's schedule. Yeah, that's normal. But the only solution that I would say to you is if you don't want to work for him, then I would allow other people to take those calls and then get very busy working for partners that you may like. And many times the partners that do that will be junior partners too, by by the way. But I don't think that you need to go to another firm because of him, but I would recommend you don't have to respond. I'm actually not going to say that because I don't want to get you in trouble. But if you get very busy working for other people, you don't have to respond to his emails, or you can tell him that you're busy. The big thing is you just need to make sure you're always getting your hours. And I would be very careful about making sure that you have enough work. That's it. Okay, I think that's all the questions for today, guys. This was an employer webinar, so mainly employers ask questions, but that weren't in today. So I appreciate everyone being on it. And our next webinar will be on next Wednesday. Thank you for all the questions, and have a good rest of the day. Thanks.